been a better time to start living the American dream.
What you saw was President Trump with one hand reaching out his hand to Democrats and with the other hand holding up a fist.
My duty is to defend Americans. Americans are dreamers too.
The president has offended his base deeply with this path to citizenship.
To all the dreamers, you are part of our story. We will fight for you.
He did highlight what is his biggest asset, the strong economy.
We enacted the biggest tax cuts in American history.
We've seen the worst of this epidemic. He didn't lay out any real plans to deal with it.
The president very effective using his guests.
So let's you embody the goodness of our nation.
This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Allison Camerata.
All right, welcome to our viewers in the United States and around the world. This is your new day. It's Wednesday, January 31st, 6 o'clock here in Washington. And here is the starting line. The theme of President Trump's first State of the Union could be Divided We Stand. President Trump's hailing the start of a new American moment, calling for unity, calling for bipartisanship. All of it were mixed with policies that kept half the audience in Congress literally frozen. Now, with the threat of another government shutdown looming next week, the president brushed over spending issues that will be very real. The focus was on the 4 pillars of his immigration plan. His offer of a path to citizenship for nearly 2 million undocumented immigrants is upsetting conservatives. However, the trade for that pathway has Democrats on edge because of billions for a border wall, ending the visa lottery, and limiting family reunification. The president also raising eyebrows by saying Americans are dreamers too.
Then, in other key moments, President Trump used the stories of everyday Americans to put a human face on his policies through his 80-minute-long speech. Mr. Trump also issuing a stark warning that North Korea could very soon threaten the United States with its nuclear-tipped missiles. And we have a new poll on how speech watchers felt the president did last night, so we'll show that to you. Absent from the president's address any mention of Russia's election interference or the ongoing Russia investigations. And President Trump seemed to offer a clue last night about the release of that controversial and classified Republican memo that alleges surveillance abuses by the FBI. So we have all of this covered for you. Let's begin with CNN's Abby Phillips. She is live at the White House. Abby.
Good morning, Allison. Well, President Trump tried to strike a pretty optimistic tone, which is a little bit different from what most Americans see from him on social media. And at about 80 minutes, that speech was among the longest ever given as a State of the Union. The president used his time to tout the dawn of a new American moment.
I call upon all of us to set aside our differences, to seek out common ground, and to summon the unity we need to deliver for the people. This is really the key. These are the people we were elected to serve.
President Trump striking a conciliatory tone, urging lawmakers to move past the deep divisions that have defined his first year in office.
This, in fact, is our new American moment.
Mr. Trump also utilizing the same polarizing language that has fermented the divide.
Americans are dreamers too.
Appearing to draw a line from dreamers to the dangerous MS-13 gang members that killed 2 teenage girls, their grieving parents guests in the audience.
For decades, open borders have allowed drugs and gangs to pour into our most vulnerable communities. They've allowed millions of low-wage workers to compete for jobs and wages against the poorest Americans. Most tragically, they have caused the loss of many innocent lives.
Mr. Trump pledging to work with both parties to strike a deal on immigration, but his plan to restrict a program that allows immigrants to bring their family members to the U.S., provoking boos from Democrats.
Under our plan,
President Trump devoting much of his speech to touting his economic successes and signature legislative achievement.
Just as I promised the American people from this podium 11 months ago, we enacted the biggest tax cuts and reforms in American history.
A claim a CNN reality check deems to be false. Mr. Trump calling on Democrats to work with him on an ambitious list of agenda items, including infrastructure, trade, opioid addiction, prison reform, and lowering the cost of prescription drugs, while boasting about rolling back a number of Obama-era policies, including the individual mandate, and announcing plans to keep the controversial military prison in Guantanamo Bay open. The president also revisiting another divisive issue he's been focused on this year, taking an apparent swipe at NFL players while honoring 12-year-old Preston Sharp for his compassion toward veterans.
Preston's reverence for those who have served our nation reminds us of why we salute our flag, why we put our hands on our hearts for the Pledge of Allegiance, and why we proudly stand for the national anthem.
Sharp was one of a number of emotional stories the president highlighted during his speech, honoring guests like Otto Warmbier's parents, the American student who was held in prison in North Korea and died shortly after his release, along with a North Korean defector who lost his leg while fleeing the regime. President Trump issuing a stark warning about the North Korean threat and calling on Congress to bolster U.S. defense.
North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear missiles could very soon threaten our homeland.
And calling on Congress to bolster U.S. defense.
As part of our defense, we must modernize and rebuild our nuclear arsenal, hopefully never having to use it, but making it so strong and so powerful that it will deter any acts of aggression.
Mr. Trump made no mention of Russia's interference in the 2016 election, but was overheard on camera with conservative Congressman Jeff Duncan talking about releasing a classified GOP memo that alleges surveillance abuses by the FBI, a move Democrats say is meant to undermine the Russia probe.
Let's release the memo. Don't worry. 100%.
Now, with that out of the way, the president is expected to make a decision about that controversial GOP memo sooner rather than later, sources tell CNN. But what he won't be doing is taking his State of the Union policies out on the road as previous presidents have done. The president has no plans to go out giving speeches as prior presidents have done in order to reinforce some of the messages that he put out last night. Allison and Chris.
All right, Abby, thank you very much. So what did he say? What did it mean last night? What will it mean going forward? Let's discuss with a couple of big brains, CNN senior political analyst and executive director of political programming, I hope we qualify, Mark Preston, and CNN politics reporter and editor-at-large, Chris Cillizza. So, Chris, what were your big takeaways?
Number one, Preston has an awesome title.
Yeah.
That was very impressive. Director of political programming.
It
Number
changes
two,
every time he's on the show.
yeah, boss. Okay, in a vacuum, an effectively delivered speech.
48% said
right.
high marks.
I mean, look, the public who watch it generally react pretty well to these things because you have the entire focus of everything on you. The speech it was 80% about what he had done effectively in his mind, 20% about what he wanted to do. The thing is, fool me once last year with his speech, which was, I thought, maybe even better. Don't fool me twice, because the last year has suggested that what Donald Trump says, whether it's in the State of the Union or anywhere else, it's just not borne out. And I think you're going to see that in the next few days when he releases, I'd be stunned if he didn't release this Nunes memo, which a lot of senior FBI and intelligence officials have urged him not to do for a number of reasons. He says what he says on one day. I think we have a tendency, because of sort of the past presidencies we've covered, to try to draw a narrative arc, to try to create a storyline of, oh, is this the pivot to the presidency? No, who he is a guy who is unpredictable and impetuous. He will continue to be unpredictable and impetuous, but as a speech, for him, well delivered.
He started by recognizing people in the audience with heroes, firefighters, Hurricane Harvey helpers, and that was effective. I mean, obviously, that gets the whole room clapping, you know. So there, as you know, there are always those moments of the split screen of Republicans standing and cheering.
Never had more than we did last night, that's for sure.
So there was a lot of that. But he started with that moment, the moments of everybody, you know, applauding heroes and things.
You know, he did. I mean, first of all, he walked into a room where half the room was divided. So he had half the room against him. So to your point, to be able to point out American heroes, you know, the couple, the police officer who adopted the baby who was addicted to
crack. Who will be on later this morning with us?
Oh, fantastic. I mean, what a great American story that is. I would go one step further, though, and he had very sad stories. The Wambeckers, their son who died. There was the two families that were there whose daughters were killed by MS-13 gang members. And I think that just reinforced his narrative of fear. I mean, he does play this idea that he's the one who's going to come in and fix the American carnage, that he's going to clean up the streets. I mean, look, it was terribly moving. My wife and I were watching it last night, and she had a tear in her eye when she was looking at those families. But again, I didn't find the speech to be very uplifting. It played to his base. He's going to be solid at 40. But for all talk of conciliatory rhetoric.
No, there was a lot of dark talk. There was a lot of manifestations of threat. Here's a signature moment from last night.
Struggling communities, especially immigrant communities, will also be helped by immigration policies that focus on the best interests of American workers and American families. For decades, open borders have allowed drugs and gangs to pour into our most vulnerable communities. They've allowed millions of low-wage workers to compete for jobs and wages against the poorest Americans. Most tragically, they have caused the loss of many innocent lives.
So you had him laying out there. It's fact challenge, no question about it, but it was certainly something that was a salvo politically. Van Jones kind of captured how people on the left felt about it with this.
He was selling sweet-tasting candy with poison in it. What he said about those young people, he implied, and he did it deliberately, that dreamers are gang members. And when you look at the numbers, facts matter. Facts matter.
Facts matter that some dreamers are gang members.
No, you want to know what the numbers are?
That's a fact.
You know what the numbers are? 39 kids. This is according to the U.S. government. 39 kids.
Keep saying picking on the dreamers and using that group as a villain base is a mistake statistically. Last night, there were some really sad couples in the audience. They were demonstrating amazing strength just by being there. African-American families whose kids have been killed by MS-13 members. The president described the people who killed them as minors who had come into the country illegally, and obviously is a direct parallel to Dreamers. So thematically, Liz, what do you think of this? This is a song I hear you humming all the time.
It's so true.
Demi Lovato's Sorry, Not Sorry.
I celebrate all of her work.
If you get the lyrics to that song, it is spot on what was happening during the speech last night. He was literally looking at the Democrat side. He didn't even use a prompter on the side of the room where they were. He was looking to his left almost the entire night. That's where the Republicans were. He would look and he'd be like, listen, things are tough, sorry, to the Democrats. And he'd look right to the Republicans and say, not sorry.
Right.
And he went on all night with a little bit of a revenge tour, painting dark pictures of American reality and what he's going to do about it.
Yeah, I mean, his rhetoric, his policies have been all over the place, but his rhetoric, this is to Mark's point, hasn't changed all that much. It is based in fear. It is dark. I mean, there's no question. It is only I can protect you from these things. He uses, I think we've become a little bit normalized to the rhetorical excesses he uses. Some of that language in there, these people will come into your country and they can murder your kids just like those people in the audience. All presidents.
Hence this riff. Being so bad got me feeling so good.
Wow.
Showing you up like I knew that I would.
You actually did print out Demi Lovato's song.
He has it on his phone. But so this is who the guy is, right? And I think that he knows that it works. It is fear is one of the most powerful motivating factors in politics. I think lots of people voted out of fear in 2016. They believed he and he alone was the guy who could fix this. That speech, again, most State of the Unions are like 50% victory lap, 50% here's what I want to do. That was 80%, literally by time, over an hour of just, and then I did this,
longest.
and then I did this, and then I did
Right,
he wanted you here clapping for him. He did some of his own clapping for himself, and he did. But it doesn't change anything. Though I'm not sure there's a speech that could be given by Donald Trump that would change anything.
Here's something else unusual. There was not one Democratic response. There were many. So it was most unofficial. So there were like 4 unofficial and 1 official. So here is the official Democratic response from Joe Kennedy.
Bullies may land a punch. They may leave a mark. But they have never, not once, in the history of our United States, managed to match the strength and spirit of a people united in defense of their future.
What did you think, Mark?
I thought he was very effective. I know a lot of people said on Twitter, that his lip gloss was too bright and looked like he was drooling a little bit out of his mouth. But look at the setting that he was in. He was in a town that has been racked by the economy. He has his jacket off. He seemed very everyman. And I got to tell you, for the Democratic Party, who's been looking at their bench right now, and they're looking at possible 2020 candidates. And I'm not saying Joe Kennedy's running in 2020, but Bernie Sanders is not the future. Elizabeth Warren's not the future. Joe Kennedy's the future.
Yeah, but what does it say about the Democrats' message that they had so many unofficial and official responses, not just one coherent?
The biggest underreported story of 2018 now, 2017 going into 18, is the division in the Democratic Party because Donald Trump has sucked up all the oxygen.
And Mark didn't even mention that Joe Kennedy was fixing a car before he gave that. See, the car hood was open. He had fixed the car. He just popped in, just gave the speech, go back to the car.
Message to the Democrats. Again, Demi Lovato knows. Look at the lyrics. Better walk that walk, baby. If you talk that talk, baby. And that was a message for both sides last night.
About that.
Trump's got to deliver, and the Democrats have to figure out what they can do to act on the passion that came out of Joe Kennedy.
Next hour, a poetry slam. We will talk about the State of the Union with White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. She'll be here, as well as Congressman Joe Kennedy, who gave that Democratic rebuttal, and other lawmakers from both sides.
All right. And we're also going to speak exclusively with one of President Trump's guests, Officer Ryan Holitz. We hope you know his story by now. We brought it to you at CNN. He goes, he sees a couple of addicts, and what does he do? Does he condemn them? No. He winds up adopting the child that one of them is pregnant with at the time, an opioid-addicted mother. What he took from last night, big story.
Can't wait to talk to him. So no mention of the Russia investigation, of course, in the State of the Union address. But after the speech, the president did reveal what he plans to do with the Devin Nunes Republic. Don't worry, 100%, he said. So let's bring in CNN legal analysts Carrie Cordero and Michael Zeldin. Michael worked with special counsel Robert Mueller. Great to have both of you and your expertise with us this morning. So, of course, he's going to release it. He wanted to release the memo. He then said last night that he's 100% going to release it. We don't know when. Obviously, politically, it would be possibly unwise to do it today if it were going to step on his State of the Union message. But he's going to release the memo. What's interesting is that the Department of Justice and the FBI don't want them to release this memo. They want to vet it first to see what's classified and whether or not it would endanger something. So where does that leave this memo?
Where it leaves this memo is that it's going to be released and that the president has made a decision to essentially take his personal political interests further than national interests. When your Department of Justice and your intelligence agencies and your FBI say, Mr. President, please don't do this. This is not in the national interests of the United States. And he says, I'm going to do it anyway. Then you know it's personal and political over national security. And that's sad.
Stretching the plot a little bit, you have Rod Rosenstein. There are rumors that he has mentioned in this memo about what he did with respect to surveillance. And yet he came to the White House, we're told, and lobbied the chief of staff, John Kelly, not to release it. That's according to the Washington Post, because they're concerned. People are playing off the concerns of the DOJ as defensive and as political. But you have so much experience with this FISA process and this kind of intel. Are there legitimate concerns or no?
Well, so he would be arguing not to release this memo because obviously the memo is classified. We don't know what level it's classified, whether it's secret or top secret, which changes the assessment of how much damage can be done by its release. And so he has a responsibility to protect that information. What's amazing about the reporting right now is that the president is saying he's going to release this document without having been briefed on it and without having read it. He should be receiving information not only from the Deputy Attorney General and the FBI Director, but from his Director of National Intelligence, giving him advice as to what the harm to national security would be if this memo is released in his current format. And what the Justice Department is concerned about is, number one, that the memo may be not accurate, that it doesn't reflect the rigor with which they pursued the FISA application. It makes as far as we understand publicly, it makes an allegation that they were not truthful or forthcoming with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which is a really serious allegation.
Right. The memo has to do that. The memo has to suggest, just for them to have this enthusiasm politically, it has to suggest that the dossier, the Trump dossier, or the Russia, whatever you want to call it, was being a heavy part of getting the surveillance out. It has to be
that. That is what we've heard as well.
We talked about this yesterday, which is this is an effort to undermine the credibility of the Steele dossier, because the Steele dossier, if proven true, is very damaging to Trump's personal liberty interests. And that's what it's about. That's why, Carrie, they don't care to read this stuff, because they have made a political decision. This is more important to them than the national security interests that you properly raised.
It is. And the difficulty is that a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act application that goes to the court has a number of facts in it that would establish the probable cause. And so what I suspect they are concerned about, the Deputy Attorney General and the FBI Director, is that this memo focuses perhaps on one fact when they know that they made a fulsome court. A FISA application is not a 3.5-page memo.
You've done them.
It would be, I presented many of them to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court.
You said they're always like
I was
this,
an operational lawyer.
There's like several different levels of vetting.
They are finished intelligence products. They are extraordinarily vetted. And if the reporting is correct, again, it's never been declassified that there was a FISA application. So if the leaks and the public reporting is correct that there was a FISA application on an American who was affiliated with a campaign, that would garner the most amount of scrutiny. It would be considered highly sensitive. It would have been really scrubbed very carefully, and they would have been very cautious in terms of the representations that were made to the court.
Okay, next topic, Robert Mueller and whether or not President Trump is going to sit down with him. So President Trump's lawyers seem to be making the argument yesterday that Robert Mueller has not met the threshold for a presidential interview. Tell us about that, and what happens if President Trump refuses to be interviewed by Robert Mueller?
So, taking the second question first, he should be subpoenaed. I think that the case that they're trying to make, that he hasn't met the level for overcoming executive privileges, is a spurious one. First of all, executive privilege is a communication privilege. It's the president getting advice from his top policy advisors. There's nothing about this case, obstruction of justice or collusion, that has to do with policy advice, and a lot of it has to do with before he even became the executive. So the notion that this is an executive privilege overcoming the need by a grand jury for information is silly. But the standard, I looked at
this is from the Espy case, right?
The standard
this is small print
right.
You've got here.
Important to the investigation and potentially unavailable elsewhere. That's the standard that Mueller has to overcome. There's no credible argument that this evidence can be obtained anywhere else other than out of the mouth of the president.
Right.
So in the end, I think he's going to have to sit down, and if he fights a voluntary interview, if I were Mueller, I'd send him a grand jury subpoena and let him try to deal with the ramifications of that.
Right, but that's a very heavy-handed political move, and even though Mueller's not political, he's got to be thinking a little bit about that stuff. But it does tell us, if nothing else, that the constant calls from the president that he's excited about this, he wants to do it, that's not 100% true, at a minimum, because his lawyers wouldn't be scrubbing back to the Clinton days for this Espy case where he was a cabinet member, he had his own investigation against him, and this test was there, which is of dubious legal value, but they wouldn't be scrubbing that hard for a rationale if he really wanted to sit down.
Well, there certainly is a public messaging piece here going on, right? So the president is publicly saying, I'm willing to sit down with the special
I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it. And you know what? That might be the right public message to have. And at the same time, his lawyers are doing the job that they should be doing, which is looking at precedent, looking at situations where there previously was executive privilege asserted. There is a precedent for sitting presidents to be interviewed by investigators. So there is a history that they can turn to on that point.
All right. Perry, Michael, thank you.
My pleasure.
Hillary Clinton expressing regret for not firing a campaign about a statement that was released in her name. The statement denies an affair with the president. She played coy, saying it didn't look like her signature. Supposedly, there are a couple experts who say it is her signature, but she added she did not know where it came from. BuzzFeed News says her lawyer later confirmed that Daniels did sign this statement. She was just having fun on Kimmel, he says. As for a non-disclosure agreement that Stormy allegedly signed, she had this to say.
I know you either do or don't have a non-disclosure agreement, which, if you didn't have a non-disclosure agreement, do you have a non-disclosure agreement?
Do I?
You can't say whether you have a non-disclosure agreement, but if you didn't have a non-disclosure agreement, you most certainly could say, I don't have a non-disclosure agreement. Yes?
You're so smart, Jimmy.
First, Stormy Daniels' impersonation of Do I?
Do I?
Yours is better. The Wall Street Journal reported that President Trump's lawyer, Michael Cohen, paid Daniels $130,000 before the 2016 election to keep quiet about the alleged affair. What I don't get is why people keep interviewing her. Because if she has the NDA, which she clearly does, she's not going to say anything.
Because it's a channel stopper. You're clicking channels and you say, oh, what's this? Before you realize that she's actually not going to say anything.
There's the answer.
All right. Another headline. Hillary Clinton says she regrets her decision not to fire senior aide Burns Strider, who was accused of sexual harassment during her 2008 presidential campaign. Clinton explaining in a lengthy Facebook post why she thought a less severe punishment was appropriate, saying, quote, I did this because I did not think firing him was the best solution to the problem. He needed to be punished, change his behavior, and understand why his actions were wrong. The young woman needed to be able to thrive and feel safe. I thought both could happen without him losing his job. I believed the punishment was severe and the message was unambiguous. Clinton admits she would not make the same decision today, but believes in second chances, she says, and also that the former female staffer read every word of her statement and gave the okay to use it.
They say he didn't go to treatment. He wound up getting a second job with the Clinton organization, and he did it again.
Right.
That's why she had to come out at some point. Is Facebook the best way? You guys will debate that all day long. All right. The President's State of the Union address lasted a near record 1 hour and 20 minutes. Only Bill Clinton beat.
Joining us now to talk about all of it is Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland. He's the senior Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks for being here so early.
Allison, it's good to be with you. Thank you.
What did you hear last night in the speech?
Well, I didn't hear much about Russia. In fact, I really heard nothing about
Did you
Russia.
expect to hear about Russian meddling? I mean, why would that have been in the State of the Union?
Because Russia is a major security threat to the United States of America. It's very likely that they'll be involved in our 2018 elections. We saw over the last weekend that they were involved in the Czech elections. You go election after election. Mr. Putin is meddling in other countries in our democratic system, and the President of the United States, talking about the State of the Union, needs to talk about Russia.
What would you have wanted him to say?
Well, first, we were disappointed the day before where he did not impose any new sanctions against.
Let's stop there. So you all passed sanctions 6 months ago, and the president has refused to implement them. Why?
Well, you can speculate, but it's clear that Mr. Trump believes that he has a good relationship with Mr. Putin. He says that when Mr. Putin says he didn't interfere in our elections, that the president believes him. So it is somewhat surreal that he is allowing Mr. Putin to do these types of activities without taking action against him.
I mean, the State Department, siding obviously with the president, has said that they think, Russia has gotten the message. Russia has gotten the message. No new sanctions necessary. Your legislation spoke loud and clear.
Well, that's absolutely false. Our intelligence community tells us that Mr. Putin is still very, very active in the United States. We see that in the interference in our social media, trying to get news at a higher level. We see that in activities, as I already mentioned, in some of the European countries. We see that in Syria. We could go over more and more cases where Russia, Mr. Putin, is doing things that are against our interests. So, no, Russia has not gotten the message.
Is the U.S. prepared today for the midterms to defend itself against any kind of future Russian meddling?
No. With the President of the United States not taking the leadership, the way our free election system works, the way that it is so open, you need to be sophisticated in your defense. We saw that if you are in Germany and France, they took actions. It was effective. Their leaders recognized the risk and took action President Trump is not.
So what should President Trump be doing? What action did they take that we're not taking?
Well, there's several things. First, you need to work with social media companies so we have complete disclosure with foreign interests getting involved in paid advertisements or recognizing that there's ways that they elevate news that's fake.
Yeah, Facebook's on that. I mean, Facebook would say that they're tackling that.
But not from the president. We've had our own discussions, but there's no policy in this country to try to protect our free election system. There's been no efforts made to deal with Russia's cyber activities. One of the sanctions that we passed was new sanctions on Russia for their cyber attacks. They haven't imposed any of those sanctions.
This House Republican memo, the Devin Nunes crafted memo about whether or not there were surveillance abuses at FISA. Are you prepared for this to come out? Do you want to see what's in there?
Well, this to me is very, very sad and dangerous. We're talking about defending the rule of law, defending the independence of the Department of Justice. You would think that Congress would stand up for the independence of the Department of Justice. There used to be a time that Democrats and Republicans joined together to protect the FBI, the Department of Justice, but it looks like that the Republicans are prepared to compromise our rule of law system in order to protect the president.
I want to ask you about what happened with a recent meeting with the CIA director, Mike Pompeo. He met with his Russian counterparts. They came to the U.S., including, it's possible, but though Director Pompeo won't confirm, the top Russian spy. What are we to make of this?
Well, first of all, we found out about it through a Russian tweet, as I understand it. So it was the Russian authorities that let us know that he was here, sort of bragging that here we have sanctions against one of their individuals, and that person's here in the United States. So we're not even enforcing our existing sanctions against individuals who are not permitted to be in the United States.
Have you shared your thoughts with Director Pompeo?
I have not seen him since this came to light. I assure you that Congress, I will be doing oversight to find out why current sanctions are not being enforced the way they should be, and also to understand that we're going to watch. The president, I think, said, or Secretary of State said, this is day one of imposing sanctions, that we're still open for imposing sanctions. We need to have congressional oversight, including why this individual was here in the United States.
Senator Ben Cardin, thanks so much. Great to talk to you this morning. Thanks for coming in. Chris.
All right, a night to remember for police officer Ryan Holitz and his wife Rebecca. They were special guests of the President of the United States and First Lady at the State of the Union. CNN was with them, and they were there for beautiful reason. Their story next.
Rebecca.
Introducing the new 2018 Ford F-150 with best-in-class towing, best-in-class payload, and best-in-class.
Holitz and his wife, who adopted a baby from a heroin-addicted homeless mom that he came across in the line of duty. We're going to talk to Officer Holitz live in a moment. It is great to have him here. But first, the man who brought this story to you in the first place, CNN's Ed Lavandera, joins us now with it. And I got to tell you, sometimes we do a service, and you check that box for America with this story.
I mean, it's as amazing as the night was for the Holitz family, to think that just a couple of months ago we were interviewing them and getting to know them. Never in our wildest imagination did we think that it was going to end the way it did last night. The day was absolutely amazing and stunning for them as they spent the day at the White House, and then it culminated with the Holitz family there, center stage at the State of the Union.
The President of the United States.
Even as a young kid, Ryan Holitz found watching the State of the Union address on TV mesmerizing. But a front row seat to the rich pageantry, seated next to the First Lady, was never even a remote fantasy.
He's here tonight with his wife, Rebecca.
And a standing ovation from the entire chamber? Forget it. It all had to be a far-fetched fairy tale, but it wasn't.
To get a standing ovation at the State of the Union speech, what is that like?
That was pretty amazing. It was just incredible.
Has it sunk in yet?
No, of course not.
Looks like you guys are getting ready to shoot up over here.
The president recounted the story CNN first shared last month, captured by Ryan Holitz's body cam.
Ryan was on duty when he saw a pregnant, homeless woman preparing to inject heroin.
Why are you going to be doing that stuff? It's going to ruin your baby. You're going to kill your baby.
In that moment, Ryan said he felt God speak to him. You will do it. because you can. Then he went home to tell his wife, Rebecca. In an instant, she agreed to adopt. The Holettes named their new daughter Hope.
Baby Hope, cradled by Rebecca Holitz throughout the speech, won't remember this night, but her family will talk about the thunderous applause she inspired for years to come.
Ryan and Rebecca, you embody the goodness of our nation. Thank you.
The Holitz family spent the afternoon before the speech visiting the White House. A short visit with the president and vice president.
You told me you felt a responsibility to kind of carry the right message and do that. Did you accomplish what you wanted to accomplish?
Yeah, I believe so.
In what way?
I've been saying over and over that people are valuable, and that I think came across.
Baby Hope toured the grand rooms of the White House and iconic grounds outside, and there was a selfie with the other guests of the first family in the motorcade from the White House to Capitol Hill. And the magical night ended with Ryan Holitz simply thinking about Baby Hope's future.
To me, the most important thing is the fact that she has a family who loves her, and she's going to grow up in an entirely different environment that she could have, and that's the most important. This will all fade away.
And Ryan's first sign that everything had faded away as we drove him over here to the studio this morning. We stopped at every red light. You know, the motorcade time is over, you know.
Although he is a cop. If somebody's going to run lights, he can get away with it.
We had smooth sailing to the Capitol last night. This morning we hit every red light on the way.
Don't you have a siren you can put on, officer? Up next, we have that hero police officer, Ryan Holitz. He's going to join us live exclusively on New Day. There he is. Where's your siren, officer? Where is it? Okay.
Today's workplace is rapidly changing, and HR professionals must be at the top of their game. Nothing spells that more clearly.
Heart still beats, people are still good, virtue does exist. Albuquerque police officer Ryan Holitz and his wife honored by President Trump at the State of the Union. He is the police officer who adopted a baby from a homeless mother addicted to heroin. He joins us now exclusively. Ryan, truly a pleasure. Thank you for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, Baby Hope is home. She got a little bit of the sniffles, even though you have 125 kids already. You know, you have 5 kids, and now you have Hope. She's a little sick, so that's where Mom and Baby are this morning.
Yes, she's taking care of Hope.
How are you doing after this magical night where you were called the embodiment of the goodness of America?
Well, that's just a stunning statement. I think Rebecca and I really just feel like we're normal, quiet people, and everything that's happened has been very surreal, and we're still kind of trying to process what's happened, because never in a million years, if you had asked me, would I have told you at some point in my life I'd be where I was last night.
But you're not normal people, actually. I mean, you came upon, in your work as a police officer, you came upon this homeless couple. The woman was expecting a child, and they were shooting up heroin. And so how did you get from that point of encountering them to you and your wife deciding, we're going to adopt this baby?
Well, I like to tell people that I went up to Tom and Crystal with the intent of doing my normal routine of investigating, probably taking somebody to jail. And when I saw that Crystal was pregnant and began to converse with her, her humanity shone through her addiction, and the love for her child shone through, and it affected me in ways that's difficult to describe. And because I feel like God led us to that point for whatever reason, we had already prepared ourselves for the possibility of adopting and fostering. And so when that moment came out, there was no hesitation. We were ready.
You're just 29 years old. It's amazing.
Younger. Yeah, I'm 27.
27 years old. I can't go any lower than 29. I don't recognize any age younger than that. It makes me feel too bad about myself. 27 years old. You already have 5 kids. What a beautiful demonstration of what you and your wife are, is a kind of look for me through what you are not. You are not out here pounding your religion on people. You know, you obviously have a very strong faith, yes. But that's not your message. your message through your own actions and through your words is this was the right thing to do. People matter. And to hear it from anybody, and a police officer, and someone so young, that's the beauty of the message. You're not here to be a politician. You're not here to push religion on anybody. You're just an example of how you live your life.
I try to do my best. I feel that anybody can say anything, but it's what you do that matters. And so I could have, for example, on that day have told Crystal about all sorts of resources that are available. I could point her in all these directions. But if I didn't actually reach out and help her, who else is going to do it, really?
So let's bring the viewers up to speed. So that couple, Crystal, and her partner, who you encountered that day, they have now been in rehab. And I know it was no easy feat getting them there because CNN featured those moments of trying to get them into rehab and all of their second thoughts and all of the struggle that they had. But they've been clean, as far as you know, for 40 days?
Approximately 40 days. So I was talking, and I lose track of time with everything that's going on.
You have a new baby.
Yes.
Got 5 kids.
So I was recently talking to Crystal on the phone, and she had mentioned that they're excited because their 40-day mark is coming up. So I don't know if it's passed quite yet or if we're just about there, but 40 days sober. I mean, that's incredible. And it's a hope that I always had. I always had faith that we would get to this point. But that is one of the things I was so incredibly grateful to Ed and the story is that it went to such a large platform that somebody actually stepped forward to help them.
I know, that is incredible. And just very quickly, do you know what their relationship will be with Hope, the baby, in the future?
You're talking about Tom and Crystal?
Yeah.
At this point, as they are in recovery, we're sending them pictures, we're giving them updates. We want them to be able to continue to see her and be in her life. I think she's going to know how much they loved her, and that's never going to be in question.
Their road is very long. Let's talk about this reality. You know, we were talking before we came back here live that you say 80 to 90% of your job on a daily basis somehow involves drugs and addiction, whether it's, you know, through crime of opportunity or selling or whatever. It's a big issue now, and good point for the president is opioids are on the spectrum now. Heroin is on the spectrum. We need help. Money's getting thrown, politics, a lot of talk. What do you see every day in terms of where the need is and what still needs to be done by government?
So one of the biggest issues that comes up when I talk to somebody who's addicted, there's many of them who tell me, I would love to go to treatment. There's just nowhere for me to go. And in our particular state, there's such a limited amount of resources available that the waiting lists are hundreds of people ahead of them. And so at that point, they're going to get discouraged and just stay on the street doing what they're doing. And unfortunately, as a police officer, I find them with drugs, I find them committing crime, they go to jail. A lot of them get right back out on the street because they're not held. And so then they're right back doing drugs again. So it's just a cycle. We've had some success with drug courts rather than putting them in prison, trying to do rehab. And those are very limited because of funding.
Do you want to hear more from our officials, from the White House, about what the plan is?
Yeah, I think that at this point, as we're trying to get this plan together, I don't know what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, because I think the limiting factor is it's going to be expensive. Right. Tom and Crystal's rehab and recovery, if you could see the numbers for how expensive just the two of them can be.
If it weren't for this benefactor who came in, who knows where they'd be right now?
There's no way I could afford it personally. Right. I had been thinking about setting up GoFundMe to raise money to do rehab, and then they came in and offered that, and it was fantastic. But that was one of the roadblocks I was encountering. As much as I wanted to get them into rehab, I just didn't have anywhere that could take them, and it's very, very expensive to do a legitimately good rehab and recovery center.
Right. We need the resources, and you're living it. And you did more than any human being really could ever be expected to, and you inspire us. So, Officer Holitz, thanks so much.
It's so blow away. You're not here to sell drug policy. You're not a politician. You're just an example of what somebody does when their head and their heart are aligned to do the right thing.
Well, thank you. Like you said, my faith directs what I do, but I feel that action is the most important thing.
Many believe, few act the way you did. The best and all blessings to you, your wife, your 5 kids, and you've given us literally hope in 2 different ways.
Great to talk to you.
All right, look, if that doesn't make you feel good about how you want to live your own life, I don't know what will. Thanks to you, our international viewers, for watching. For you, CNN Newsroom is next. For our U.S. viewers, New Day continues. There is a ton of news. What do you say? Let's get after it.
And good morning, everyone. Welcome to your new day. President Trump hailing the start of a new American moment in his first State of the Union address, calling on a deeply divided country to unify and challenging Republicans and Democrats to work together for the American people. The president also laid out the 4 pillars of his immigration plan, leaving both Democrats and Republicans a bit on edge, but for very different reasons.
All right, now, notably absent from the president's 80-minute address, maybe the 3rd longest ever, was any mention of Russia's election interference or the ongoing investigation into possible collusion with Trump's campaign. Not a big surprise, but it matters. And this is going on as the president offers a major clue about whether he is going to release a controversial and classified memo by Republicans that alleges surveillance abuses by the FBI. His own DOJ appointees do not want him to release it. We have it all covered. Let's begin with CNN's Abby Phillip, live at the White House. Abby.
Hi, good morning. Well, President Trump tried to strike an optimistic tone last night in his speech, a stark contrast to what we usually see him doing on social media, where he's a lot more combative. But in that nearly 80-minute long speech, he was touting what he called the dawn of a new American moment. It was far less policy and more tone from him last night.
I call upon all of us to set aside our differences, to seek out common ground, and to summon the unity we need to deliver for the people. This is really the key. These are the people we were elected to serve.
President Trump striking a conciliatory tone, urging lawmakers to move past the deep divisions that have defined his first year in office.
This, in fact, is our new American moment.
Mr. Trump also utilizing the same polarizing language that has fermented the divide.
Americans are dreamers too.
Appearing to draw a line from dreamers to the dangerous MS-13 gang members that killed 2 teenage girls, their grieving parents guests in the audience.
For decades, open borders have allowed drugs and gangs to pour into our most vulnerable communities. They've allowed millions of low-wage workers to compete for jobs and wages against the poorest Americans. Most tragically, they have caused the loss of many innocent lives.
Mr. Trump pledging to work with both parties to strike a deal on immigration, but his plan to restrict a program that allows immigrants to bring their family members to the U.S., provoking boos from Democrats.
Under our plan,
President Trump devoting much of his speech to touting his economic successes and signature legislative achievement.
Just as I promised the American people from this podium 11 months ago, we enacted the biggest tax cuts and reforms in American history.
A claim a CNN reality check deems to be false. Mr. Trump calling on Democrats to work with him on an ambitious list of agenda items, including infrastructure, trade, opioid addiction, prison reform, and lowering the cost of prescription drugs, while boasting about rolling back a number of Obama-era policies, including the individual mandate, and announcing plans to keep the controversial military prison in Guantanamo Bay open. The president also revisiting another divisive issue he's been focused on this year, taking an apparent swipe at NFL players while honoring 12-year-old Preston Sharp for his compassion toward veterans.
Preston's reverence for those who have served our nation reminds us of why we salute our flag, why we put our hands on our hearts for the Pledge of Allegiance, and why we proudly stand for the national anthem.
Sharp was one of a number of emotional stories the president highlighted during his speech, honoring guests like Otto Warmbier's parents, the American student who was held in prison in North Korea and died shortly after his release, along with a North Korean defector who lost his leg while fleeing the regime. President Trump issuing a stark warning about the North Korean threat and calling on Congress to bolster U.S. defense.
North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear missiles could very soon threaten our homeland.
And calling on Congress to bolster U.S. defense.
As part of our defense, we must modernize and rebuild our nuclear arsenal, hopefully never having to use it, but making it so strong and so powerful that it will deter any acts of aggression.
Mr. Trump made no mention of Russia's interference in the 2016 election, but was overheard on camera with conservative Congressman Jeff Duncan talking about releasing a classified GOP memo that alleges surveillance abuses by the FBI, a move Democrats say is meant to undermine the Russia probe.
Let's release the memo. Oh, yeah, don't worry. 100%.
Well, after that big hint that he dropped on the State of the Union floor last night, and with the State of the Union out of the way, he faces a big decision about what to do with that memo. One of the other things that he is not going to be doing this week is taking his policies and his State of the Union message out on the road. The president is not expected to do what a lot of previous presidents have done, to reinforce their messages by going out into the country. He'll remain, for the most part, close to Washington. Allison and Chris.
Okay, Abby, thank you very much for all of that. Let's bring in CNN political analyst and White House correspondent for the New York Times, Maggie Haberman. Maggie, great to see you. Let's just start there with what Abby was just reporting. Do you know why the president doesn't want to take this on the road and do the sort of typical road show to try to continue to have some wind in the sails from this speech?
I mean, one of the many reasons is that he actually doesn't like traveling that much. He has not been that eager to leave the White House other than to go to Mar-a-Lago, one of his own properties, or to go golfing. There is some debate within the White House about how effective it is when he does these rallies. As you know, they are opportunities for him to sell and do well, but they are also opportunities for him to go off script and to say things that undermine the message that the White House has worked on in the first place. I think there is also a belief right now, they're not sure how many people are going to actually want the president campaigning for them in key districts and states where there are tough races. Less is more for the president right now.
Maggie, help us understand what is going to be the next dramatic turn in this presidency, which revolves around the memo. Sarah Sanders said the Nunes memo, they have no plans to release it. Then last night, the president seemed to tell another lawmaker 100% when asked to release it. What do you hear about the inclination and the timing? He could do nothing, just so people at home know. He has 5 days. He could do nothing, and then the Congress can act unilaterally. That's the way the process works. What are you hearing?
Chris, it's really important to remember that White House aides were saying, and I had heard the same as well from them, right before the speech, essentially, that the president had not yet reviewed this memo. They did not want him to see it, is my understanding from sources, to distract him from the State of the Union. And yet you heard him do the 100% with somebody who said release it. Now, it's possible that he is pleasing whatever audience he's in front of at that moment when he did it. It's also possible that he believes, which I have heard he does, that this memo, just based on what he has learned from watching cable television, would help his cause. He believes in what he understands its contents to be, and from other sources that he has heard about the information contained in it. There is an active debate going on within the White House about whether releasing this is a wise idea. As we know, the FBI director went to go visit and I think the Deputy Attorney General went to go visit the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, on Monday to ask him to please not release this memo. There are some in the White House who think this is not a good idea. We will have a verdict, I believe, on this later today.
You've had Rosenstein now go to the Chief of Staff, and you had Boyd, who is a Trump appointee in the DOJ. That's right. He also reached out to the White House saying, we haven't looked at this. This is not the way to do it.
But it would be totally counter to the president's instincts and impulses. I mean, he wants this information. It seems to comport with what he's been saying from what we know about it. So you're reporting, Maggie, is that you'll have an answer, that they might give us an answer by later today. Right. And would you be surprised if the president decided not to release it?
To a degree, only because we know that he is itching to get it out there. If he decides not to release it, it's that he has listened to the counsel of certain people within his White House, and he has listened to the counsel of the Justice Department, which has been pretty clear on this all along. Please do not release this. There is classified information in here. We do not want this out. We have seen before, there are times when the president will heed his advisor's words. This could end up being one of them, but it's, as always, we are watching some kind of a mental wrestling match going on.
I can't believe he's going to do anything without reading it, because if there's anything he's going to be sensitive to is being set up to fail.
I think that's true. I think that's true.
What do you hear about this reporting / speculation that Nunes had help from the White House? We know, by the way, that Nunes We don't know. The reporting is that he didn't read the confidential information, the classified folio that backs up his own memo, his conclusions. But what do you hear on that the White House helped?
You saw that Nunes was asked this question and he would not answer it yesterday, I believe. I think there is certainly reason to believe that somebody in the White House would be working with Nunes. We have seen that before, right? We saw that early in 2017, but I have no specific knowledge of it.
So, Maggie, that last night, let's talk about the speech. It was billed beforehand that it would be a unifying speech. It would be bipartisan in nature. Democrats...
Well, it was. He offered something for both sides, right? I mean, DACA for Democrats, but then he talked about to his base about what he has said about immigration consistently for 3 years.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's the point, is that Democrats would beg to differ in terms of, you know, that it was unifying. I mean, I'm just reading their body language of sitting on their hands.
We've never seen it any worse than last night. I've never seen Nancy Pelosi's face look like that during a State of the Union.
Yep, I agree. I mean, look, it was, I think that there were two goals that this president wanted to have with the speech last night, three. One was to essentially get through it without offering new policy. One was to get through it with, at times, extremely optimistic, lofty rhetoric, especially early on in the speech, that we don't usually hear him do in non-canned, non-teleprompter speeches, and then to not offer any new policy. It was a really retrospective look at his first year in office, and so he did all of those things. But at the end of the day, it is what we have seen with this president since the campaign. On the one hand, he offers very lofty rhetoric, and on the other hand, he puts in what Democrats, whom he claims to be extending a hand to, he knows will see as a poison pill on the topic of immigration, and that is what we saw.
All right, are you with me on
Oh, yeah,
the
Maggie,
theme yet?
Maggie, what's your jam? Because
All
we're about
Maggie,
to hear Chris's.
What's
Maggie,
my
I
what
love
now?
Poor Maggie. She always, she tries to keep it together and be serious.
She tries
and
to be professional.
I'm always shaking her base. I think this is very professional. In terms of
You're not
identifying a
physically
theme.
here, so it's different. I'm having trouble with it.
In terms of identifying a theme for
You're
last
about
night,
to have a lot of problems.
I was struck, Maggie, as I watched the entire speech, that the lyrics, the song itself by Demi Lovato, Sorry, Not Sorry, seemed to be perfectly capturing what was going on last night. Here are some of the lyrics. You be the judge.
Chris is going to read them.
Okay? Baby, I'm sorry. Not sorry. But voice aside,
keep going.
Being so bad got me feeling so good.
Wow.
And then, looking for revenge, feeling like a 10, the best I've ever been.
That doesn't rhyme.
I know how bad it must hurt. I didn't write it. I didn't know how bad. I know how bad it must hurt to see me like this, but it gets worse.
Also doesn't rhyme.
I know how bad it must hurt to see me like this, but it gets worse. When I was watching him last night, he didn't even look at the prompter, Maggie. All right, back to us. He didn't even look at the prompter on the side of the stage where the Democrats were. Right. And he seemed to be looking at them, and he would be partially conciliatory, I'm sorry, and then look to the Republicans and say, not sorry. And there was a little bit of a revenge tour going on for him. He was painting what he called carnage the first time around. Yes, beautiful examples of people who had made it through horrible situations in the audience, poignant. But
jump in anytime.
What do you make of this? I wanted to lay out the case fully before you shoot it down.
I just wanted to see where this was going.
Do you see this as thematically relevant?
I do, but I think that you could sit to go with your metaphor there. You could set that tune to repeat, right? I mean, you could have said that at any point over the last 3 years of the campaign and the presidency. I did think there were real human, poignant moments in that speech in terms of, in particular, the attendees who he singled out. You were interviewing one of them before, but yes, he would then turn to his base and essentially say, look what I did for you. I found him not looking at Democrats, and I hear what you're saying, to be less about sort of the sorry, not sorry. That's a piece of it. He's so interpersonally conflict averse that the way he generally deals with it when he is face-to-face with someone who he has an issue with is he tries to pretend they're not there as long as he can, and that's how I interpreted that. But I like that song a lot, and I'm taking my daughter to that concert, so I'll bear that.
There you go.
Wow.
There you go.
Strong endorsement.
Very. Maggie can even run with your dramatic reading of Demi Lovato. Wow. She's that good.
Very early in the morning.
Right. Okay. In the next hour, we'll talk about Look What You Made Me Do.
Oh, that's nice. Taylor Swift.
Exactly. Maggie, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
I know that.
So in the Democratic response, Congressman joked the Democratic response to the State of the Union, pitching a better deal for Americans. So can Democrats work with Republicans to achieve their goals? And what is their message? Congressman Joe Kennedy joins us now. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? How was that experience last night?
It was a lot of fun. I have a lot more caffeine and a lot less lip gloss on, so that's a start.
Now, hold on a second, Congressman. Was it lip gloss? Is that what you're going with? Or was it chapstick?
Yeah, it was. I would go with chapstick, but so whatever it was a little too much, apparently. I should have put it on the spotlight, and I didn't.
Hey,
but Twitter
welcome
has
to
let
my
me know,
world,
so hopefully
Congressman.
I won't make that mistake. I mean, right there with you. Oops.
Yeah, I mean, HD is unforgiving. And so all of the chat
Yes,
this
it
morning
is.
about if your lips were too moisturized or too glossy, I mean, this is life in the big leagues, you know? But
apparently.
right? But about, well, first of all, let's just talk about all the Democratic responses. What did you make of there being not one, not just yours, but there being 5 Democratic responses?
I think it's great. Look, I was obviously thrilled with the opportunity and honored by it. I think what our party needs at the moment is an awful lot of voices out there. We're a big tent party. It's a broad, diverse country, part of what those themes that I tried to touch on last night, and to try to find ways to actually construct an overarching narrative that will unify not only our party, but our country. And so to have a number of folks that are out there putting forth that message. Look, it's still early in the electoral process. I expect that will unify over the course as we get tighter to those midterm elections. And then certainly as we go through the process towards 2020, I think part of that is will come together as we find a nominee. But in the meantime, I think I'd encourage it.
But it's not a unified message. I mean, it's actually Exhibit A of Democrats' division. You know, that your message couldn't just stand alone, that there were all of these unofficial messages from Bernie Sanders and beyond that cropped up. I mean, that makes it seem as though Democrats are actually not on the same page.
I think that there's one, so I haven't seen all of the responses yet. I think that there's themes that obviously connect those responses from many of my Democratic colleagues that I think you'll see highlighted over the course of the weeks and months ahead. And again, I think, look, believe me, I feel this angst as an elected Democrat, where I hear all the time about what's our message and who are the leaders of the party, who's going to be your nominee in 2020, et cetera, et cetera. Look, I think what the most important thing that Democrats need to do, and I think it's better for our country, is you have a big, broad debate. You have people that are putting forth those narratives and seeing whether those messages resonate and testing them out and seeing what we can do to build those constituencies and highlight those similarities and then bring people together. And so I do think it's an important part to this process as we go along, ramping up to these midterms, and I'm sure well after.
Let me play one more portion of your response last night about bullies. Listen to this.
Bullies may land a punch. They may leave a mark. But they have never, not once, in the history of our United States, managed to match the strength and spirit of a people united in defense of their future.
So was that about President Trump?
Look, it's, I think, about anybody that seeks to scapegoat people they should be protecting. We all have dealt with bullies over the course of our lives. I think the lessons that we learned from the time you're a little kid is that when somebody's exhibiting that type of behavior, you stand up for the folks that they're trying to take it out on. You stand up for the folks that are scapegoating. And I think what the theme through the remarks that I tried to highlight last night was that our country has always aspired to be that unifying force, that unifying, that city on a hill, if you will, that example of what a society that is open and inclusive and fair looks like. And I don't think we've seen those actions out of this president. We heard some very nice words last night about coming together and unifying the party, unifying the country, which, look, there's not a single person out there that's against it. What we have then seen over the course of the past year is a track record that does literally anything but. And I think the president and his administration have to own not just his words, but his actions. And his words can be divisive enough.
Why didn't you use his name last night?
Look, this isn't just about one person. It isn't just about the President of the United States. This is also about who we are as a country, who we are as a nation, who we aspire to be, and about a message that I think Democrats need to be putting forward. And so that I think gets back to the core of who we are and what we stand for. And so while obviously, yes, the speech was a response to the President's State of the Union. It was, in effect, about the character in which he has been leading the country. It was also, my hope anyway, bigger than that.
Listen, you hear lots of pundits, I think, say you can't just be against the president. That's not going to be a platform. That's not going to be something that Americans can get their arms around. So can you define what the Democrats' overarching message is for voters?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it is one where we are stronger when we stand together. We are stronger when we fight for each other. That gets back to the core of what this country is about. It means that you have an economy that, yes, can and should boast about those record stock prices, but recognizes that 50% of Americans don't own a single stock. 80% of the stocks are controlled by about 10% of American families. That using the stock market as a barometer for economic growth is not the right measure. It's helpful, but it's certainly not inclusive of many of the other folks and families that I was with last night in Fall River, the students that we were with at Diamond, that vocational school. The stock market going up is helpful, but that's not necessarily going to guarantee them a way to a solid middle-class lifestyle. And that's the part that I think we need to continue to focus on. Look, there are an awful lot of issues out there that are important to this country. They're important to 320 million Americans. It's a big, broad tent nation. That's something we should celebrate. We also have to recognize that if you are struggling to keep a roof over your head, food on your plate, your kid in school, and save for retirement, then nothing else really matters. And so we have to have a core economic message that is focused at not just those that are benefiting from the economic system we've got at the moment, but that those that aren't and that are still struggling to have access to it. And that's where our focus needs to be.
Congressman Joe Kennedy, thanks so much for recapping it all with us this morning. Great to talk to you.
Allison, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, coming up in our next hour, we have White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. She's going to join us live right here on New Day with the thoughts inside the White House about the speech.
Up next, we go to a different Kennedy for another take on last night. There's no relation, obviously. Republican Senator John Kennedy joins us. What did he make of the speech as a Republican from the South? And does he think the president should release a classified memo alleging FBI misconduct?
Speak on behalf of the American people and to address...
I tried hard to quit smoking. But when we brought our daughter home, that was it. Now I have Nicoderm CQ.
The Nicoderm CQ patch. Kate, that money. That's because whoever is helping with the speech knows that's a big, big problem. The president also outlining his 4-pillar immigration plan. Both parties like and hate aspects of it. So what are we going to see? Is anything going to get passed, especially in a midterm election year? Let's get some great perspective for you from Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana. He serves on the Judiciary Committee. Always a pleasure,
Good
Senator.
morning.
We appreciate you coming on the show, making the case to the audience and giving them their respect. So last night, even someone who cannot see would be aware that that was one divided room. Often is, but not to the degree that I saw last night. How do you fix that?
There's an old expression, it's not the whistle that pulls the train, talk's cheap. Now, the president clearly last night was trying to reassure his base. He was trying to establish some sort of harmonious relationship with Democrats, particularly in Congress. He talked about issues. I mean, it was interesting. He's a showman. You can tell he's experienced in television. When he would hit an applause line that he thought the Democrats would like, he would turn to them and he would open his arms, you know, open body language, welcoming. Prescription drugs, he declared war on the cost of prescription drugs. Now, how we do that, there are ways to do that. He didn't go into them, but it'll be very divisive. I think he thinks he has offered middle ground on immigration. Whether 60 votes in the Senate see it that way is a totally different story.
Is it middle ground, Senator, or did he offer parcels of opposite ground? Because part of your party, when they hear pathway to citizenship, and it's not fair to simply say, well, anybody who feels that way, they don't like these people. There are people who are arguing law and order, and then you have some other issues in the party as well. But they hear that and they're like non-starter. Yeah. And then you have Democrats now, maybe in an equal or greater number, who are saying, you either do DACA as a standalone, or maybe we'll include security in it because we have to get it done. But these other things, the lottery and family reunification, or what's being called chain migration, it will never happen. So where's the deal in that?
Well, I think it's really a fight over timing. Conservatives, particularly people in my state, they will support a legal status for kids brought here as kids. Now they're adults. But they want to see the border security first. They don't believe that if they agree to legal status or amnesty, that there'll ever be border security. The Democrats, on the other hand, there's a lack of trust there. They want to see the amnesty or legal status first, because they don't believe that the president will follow through if they give him border security first. So it's really a question of timing. Now, can we? I confess I'm much less sanguine than some of my colleagues on getting 60 votes. If we can get 60 votes, it's got to pass the House, and the president's got to sign it. And, Chris, that's a tall order, because one of the things, if you're on the floor, you can tell that there is wild enthusiasm for the president among Republicans in the House. Enthusiasm, but less so among Republicans in the Senate. And I think I'd say the Democrats last night, they're skeptical, put them down as doubtful. But if the president puts meat on the bone in terms of prison reform, in terms of curbing the cost of prescription drugs, and there are ways to do it. Now, they will be controversial.
There's certainly ways to do it. I mean, the drug prices are crazy. They have been for a long time. You guys have been held hostage by that industry. You'll have to do it, but you're going to make a lot of deep pockets unhappy.
Well, I'm not recommending this, but one thing that's been talked about through the year, if he just said tomorrow, and again, I'm not recommending this because there are pros and cons.
Right.
If he said, okay, Medicare is going to start negotiating the price of prescription drugs. Boom.
Yeah, you would. You'd also see a tank in a lot of the different financial aspects that hit Wall Street on it. And it's a question of who do you want to help, who do you want to hurt, who do you want as an enemy, who do you want as a friend. He's got to make these choices.
What he didn't talk about, and I wish he had, I wish he talked more about a topic that's very, very much alive on Capitol Hill, net neutrality. And I wish he talked about sanctions on the Russians. And explain to us why he is not immediately imposing the sanctions, because I think President Putin has acted for the past 5 years like a thug.
I mean, objectively, it seems to be true based on the intelligence community and every piece of data that we have. And you may have seen your answer in what the president also didn't talk about. Can you imagine someone not saying something as president when a fighter jet from Russia comes within 5 feet of a U.S. Navy plane? Yeah. He doesn't even say anything. And this is not a man who's shy to comment. But now you have your biggest obstacle to making a deal. This memo from Nunes has problems with the intelligence community, has a lot of political problems. The president has it on his desk. We are told he hasn't read it, which is a little surprising. If he releases that memo, who's going to want to do a deal on the left with the right? That's all you'll be fighting about for the foreseeable future.
Well, a couple of points. We can't let the politics of the moment cloud our judgment. If there's classified information in that memo, it shouldn't be released. If they release it anyway, to be fair, the Democrats ought to be allowed to release their memo. My strong preference would be not have either side put spin on it, go through the original material, and try to take out all the classified information. I see things on the Russian investigation a little differently from my colleagues. I trust the FBI. I think the vast majority of the members of the FBI are apolitical law enforcement, best in the world. Now, some of my colleagues disagree with me. I don't doubt there's some political animals over there on both sides. We can't do damage to the premier law enforcement agency in the world. I think if they're allowed to get the facts, and then present them to the American people are smart enough to figure it out for themselves.
Isn't that what they're doing with the Inspector General report right now that's supposed to be out this spring?
That's part of it. And if the Inspector General report can be released without classified information, it should be released. I think the FBI, when it concludes its investigation, is going to have to change its protocol a bit. Usually they don't comment on investigations. Right. This time, I think would be worthy of them saying, okay, here is what we have found. I can tell you what they're going to find. I don't know the details. There's no question that the Russians tried to interfere in our election.
Oh, but that's not what you guys are looking at. What Nunes wants to conclude, maybe even with help from the White House, is that the real interference in the election was done by the Democrats and the FBI, who were trying to help Clinton.
That's the issue.
This is a counter-narrative.
There are two issues. One issue is, did somebody in President Trump's campaign play footsie with Vladimir Putin? Number two, the allegation now is, did some members of the FBI play footsie with Secretary Clinton's campaign. And you got to trust somebody in this world, Chris. I trust, maybe I'm naive, I trust the men and women, the vast majority of whom I think are apolitical at the FBI. Just give us the facts. Don't spin the American people. The American people, I've said this before, they're smart. They don't read Aristotle every day because they're too busy earning a living, but they will figure this out, and they filter what people try to spin them on.
Well, Senator Kennedy, I appreciate your candor as always.
Thanks for having me.
You're always welcome on the show to make the case to the American people.
Thank you.
Allison.
Okay, Chris, the Me Too movement making a visible mark at the State of the Union.